Okay, continuing on with our discussion of the Miller test. Again, you should know this pretty well by this point, but it takes an average person applying contemporary local community standards, finds the work taken as a whole, appeals to the prurient interest, and we're going to look at that in a little bit more detail. The work depicts in a patently offensive way sexual conduct specifically defined by applicable state law, and the work in question lacks serious literary, artistic, political, scientific value. So again, it's kind of to shorten it down. It's usually appeals to the prurient interest, patently offensive, lacks redeeming value. So, who is an average person? That's always a tough question, legally speaking, because the law uses average person all the time, but no one's average. And in this case, the courts have said that the material is to be judged neither on the basis of each juror's personal opinion, nor by its effect on a particular sensitive or insensitive person or group. So, applying the standard as an average person, we try to make the person be as objective as possible and not think about that this would be obscene to one particular group. So that's why in class I've often said we can't really think about the children, although that in the past has been the standard, that it corrupts youth, and that there's often we say things, well, we don't want that to be seen because we don't want the kids to see it. Well, that's one of the things that automatically leads you to a conclusion without even looking at the facts. Because you look at it, you think, I don't want my kids to see this, now it must be obscene. But what, I don't know, I may allow my kids to see versus what someone in another class may allow their kids to see, someone from our class may allow their kids to see, someone from First Baptist Church allows their kid to see, someone from the Roman Catholic Church or from the mosque. Everyone has different ideas of what's appropriate or not. So even if you start saying, well, think of the children, again, it's not that we're wanting to show explicit information to the children, but if we do that, we automatically have to jump to the conclusion that everything that we disagree with is obscene. If I'm on a jury, I'm not being asked for my personal opinion. I'm being asked as a member of a group who's meant to be objective when looking at the facts, is able to determine what the facts are and whether something is obscene or not based on that determination. And so it's important to remember we have to be objective when looking at this and not worry if a particular group is going to be offended by it. Community standards, again, the first one, in most jurisdictions, community standards are considered state standards. In other words, if we talk about that a member of the community applying contemporary standards, the work taken as a whole appeals to prurient interest, then again, when it says community standards, you need to think of people who live in the state of Florida, people who live in the state of Massachusetts. So we look at the whole state. We don't look at the whole country. Sometimes it does get broken down, but in most jurisdictions, the judge would tell you that we need to think as an objective person living in the state of Florida, not as a member of First Baptist Church living in the city of Jacksonville. How do you feel about this? But as an objective member of the state of Florida, how do you look at this? They're becoming more difficult to identify because of the internet. Who really, what is our community now? What do you have access to? In the past, before the internet, you had access to your immediate surroundings. If you lived in Jacksonville, you would see billboards, you would see the local TV news, or things that you invited into your house by pay-per-view, but you would have to make affirmative steps. Now with the internet, we're not isolated any longer. And so that creates a huge problem, because now, something could be produced and put onto the internet in California, and we have access to it. They often use names that are similar to other names. Some of the websites, for example, if you go to the whitehouse.com, it's definitely not the president's web address. So it turns out to be, I think, whitehouse.gov, or, yeah, that's got to be it, whitehouse.gov, because it's a government site. That's the White House. The other site, not so White House. And so kids, again, not to single them out, but we all know that stays in the back of everyone's mind, regardless how often a judge tells you to be objective. It runs through all of our minds. What is my kid going to see in this? And because the internet doesn't have the equivalent of parental blocking, a lot of providers are now providing that. Comcast, I think, offers some type of parental controls. Different places offer different parental controls, but it's still hard to regulate the internet. And so that's creating an issue of who really is the community. Is it just the state of Florida now, or is it everyone who's on the internet? So quite different standards that may come from that. And what is patently offensive? Only hardcore sexual materials meet this requirement. So if it is not hardcore, it's not patently offensive. Notice it says representations or descriptions of ultimate sexual acts, normal or perverted, actual or simulated, and representations or descriptions of masturbation, excretory functions, and lewd exhibition of genitals. So again, if it is showing the sex act, whether it's a husband and wife in the missionary position, quote-unquote normal, or perverted, showing anything else for the most part. Perversion has a wide range. If they do it actually and you see it, or if it's simulated. So what often we would think of softcore, under this definition would rise to it. So it has to be something that's a sexual act that's overt, that leads you to believe sex is really happening. Even, again, that goes along the lines of masturbation. We can definitely see that. The odd detail of this, excuse me, is that most of the things, the exhibition of genitals, masturbation, deals with some kind of sexual act or sexuality. But excretory functions, it's completely different. It's the only time that we see something besides sex being brought into the obscenity test. And that falls under patently offensive. And then lacks serious value. So it actually opens up the door wider than you would think. The first two kind of clamp down and make it very specific. Could someone find any artistic, political, or scientific value in the work? So normally we would say yes. That could someone find, masturbation, a video of masturbation be artistic? Possibly. Could be educational. We're not sure exactly the context. And that's what you do when you're looking at it. You do put it in context. Is it educational, or is it just for the prurient interest, to incite lustful feelings? And so could someone see any value in it? And then you say yes, and that means the Miller test fails. Because in order to quote-unquote pass the Miller test, it has to be, you have to say yes. You have to say yes to appeals to the prurient interest, yes to patently offensive, and no to lacking value. And if you end up saying yes to it having value, you have destroyed the Miller test, and it's not obscene.